All right, everybody, welcome to Oklahoma History. This is an intro into how we're going to proceed in the online version of the history of Oklahoma. And starting off, I'm just going to say, bear with me. This is the first time I have taught an upper division course entirely online. And so I am going to essentially warn you in saying this is going to be a lot more work for you and for me, um, because I am going to expect you to do a lot more, so that I can make sure that you're engaged and learning, which means that I'm going to have to do a lot more on my end, in terms of making sure that I'm engaged and grading a lot more. So this is entirely different for me in that, it'd be one thing if we were in the classroom and we were having a lecture format class, because in the classroom, I know who's engaged, I know who's participating, I know if you are understanding the material. I'd be able to stop and ask questions. I'd be able to allow some space for discussion. I'd be able to allow some time to pause and repeat information, or be able to stop and make connections to larger trends in the nation's history or in regional history and that sort of thing, just to make sure that you're making connections that way, or even to stop and make sure that you are connecting Oklahoma's history to what's going on in um, time periods that you have learned in classes that you have taken, perhaps with Professor Gates or Professor Bruce, or even with Professor Endicott if you have taken World War One or World War Two. But we can't do that, um, obviously, because this is an online course. And with many of you who have enrolled in this class, the other unfortunate circumstance here is that I don't know who you are. And so I don't have the opportunity to get to know you in the way that I could in the classroom. And so this is going to be yet another challenge that I'm going to have to figure out how to get around. And so that's going to require um, a lot more forced engagement through things like discussion threads and that sort of thing. And so I'm just going to warn you right now, um, the things that I typically would not require you to do had this been an in person class, I'm going to require you to do now that we're online. So if you expected this to be an easy course because it's online, if you expected this to be disengaged, if you expected this to be um, something that you could just coast along with, that you could wait a few weeks and get the work done every few weeks, this is not the course for you. And in fact, after you get done with this little Google slide presentation, that's something that you might need to consider going forward. So, this is actually a chance for you to get a preview of what's to come this semester. So, let's talk about how to get in touch with me. First of all, if you don't know, this is my email address. It's sinu.kodumthara@swasu.edu. That's how you pronounce my last name, Kodumthara. It's exactly how it's spelled. You don't need to add any syllables, consonants, vowels, nothing. It's exactly how it's spelled, Kodumthara. So sanu.kodamthara@swasu.edu, that's emailing me directly. If you have problems or have had problems with Canvas in the past, you can email me directly there and that'd be fine. Or you can just message me through Canvas and that would be perfectly acceptable as well. Either way, messaging me is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. I try to respond within the first 24 to 48 hours of your message to me. Bear in mind that I do teach four other classes in addition to History of Oklahoma. That means that I'll have anywhere from 150 to 200 students total every semester. So things get a little bit overwhelming. I do have a lot of people who try to communicate with me, a lot of people who have questions. So there is a chance that your message might get lost or I might not be able to respond to you right away. If I don't get back in touch with you within 48 hours, please make sure that you send me another message or you get in touch with me. Another way, you can call me at 580-774-3236. But I think email is probably the most effective way to get in touch with me. It's easily the most effective. And I can get back to you as soon as I can. In terms of where to find me on campus, I am in the old science building. For those of you who are familiar with where Professor Gates's office is, as most of you are, being that most of you are history education majors, um, I am in the same office suite as he is, Science 101. I'm in the same office suite, but I'm in the back corner. So, Science 101E, here are my office hours for the spring semester. I am in the office Monday and Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays, I have classes from 2 to 4:30 on Monday and Wednesday afternoons. So 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Monday and Wednesday. Tuesday and Thursdays, I will be working from home, but because I'm teaching in Yukon. So Tuesday and Thursday morning, I have office hours via Zoom. And if you notice on our Canvas homepage, which is also our syllabus, you will see that I have the meeting ID for our Zoom for my Zoom office hours available. One for our Tuesday hours and one for Thursday hours available there. So when you log in via your Zoom account. Which is available through SWASU, or which you can sign in with your Zoom account. You can use that meeting ID, and you'll be assigned to a waiting room. And as long as I'm not meeting with another student, I'll just let you in and you and I can chat that way. But I've got a couple of hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays to meet with students via Zoom. On Fridays, I am available via appointment only. Here's the thing, I am taking on a new research project next spring. And so I'm hoping that I can, and this is a brand new project. So it'll be in its research phases. And so I'm hoping to get a lot of the research done next spring. But if you need to meet with me via Zoom or on campus, I can be there. It's no big deal. Just let me know so I can make sure to schedule it. I can make sure to be there on campus so that you are there. I understand that a lot of people have work hours that don't allow them, to meet on Mondays and Wednesdays or on Zoom in the mornings. So I totally get that. So just let me know and we'll work it out. It's not that big of a deal. By the way, that picture right there is actually a photograph of Southwestern as in its early days as a teachers college. So I just want to show you photographs of early Oklahoma history as we go through this sort of Oklahoma history approaches. So here's what I want to do, and here's what I want to talk about. Um, so many of you, I understand, and I totally get, um, are going to view this or see this as an obligation, an obligatory course to take because you are history education majors, and I get it. So I want to explain to you why this course matters and the significance of it, and why uh, I'm really sort of frustrated that I have to teach this online. So, the history of Oklahoma is actually incredibly important. And I'm not saying that as an Oklahoma historian, I am saying that as an American historian as well. So, the history of Oklahoma, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, the history of Oklahoma is actually a microcosm of the history of the United States. What I mean is, the history of Oklahoma, what takes place in Oklahoma, what takes place in Oklahoma Territory, in Indian Territory, as the Twin Territories, what takes place in Indian Territory, what takes place in the Louisiana Purchase, what takes place in this region is all indicative of what is happening in the larger United States. What's happening economically, what's happening socially, what's happening racially, what's happening politically. It's all predicted here. It's happening here before it happens in the larger United States. It's happening here as it's happening in the United States. One of the things that people don't seem to realize is that Oklahoma really serves as a mirror of what's going on in the United States. And if you understand Oklahoma history, you will understand American history. Oklahoma is a crossroads of a lot of different things happening all at the same time. Like, for example, what a lot of people don't realize about Oklahoma is that Oklahoma has a very strong, very long background in labor unions and socialism. Oklahoma has a very long history in racial tensions between Native, Black, and white peoples. Um, what you see pictured here, for example, is one of the photographs of one of the many land runs that take place in Oklahoma Territory. But it's a long, complicated history. And it's not just one land run, right? There are several land runs, but there are also, land lotteries. And again, it's long and complicated. And it's one of many approaches to make land available to white people at the expense of Native peoples. And it gets to the complications of race relations, but it also gets to the complications of economics between those who have and those who do not, because it's not going to be regular people who have access to the best land. Um, and that points to a very long economic complication that the United States has in general. That's one of the things that I want you to understand about Oklahoma history and why it matters. What you're doing is you're not just fulfilling an obligation. What you are doing is you are going to learn and understand that state history, whether you're learning about Oklahoma or Texas or Louisiana or Pennsylvania, state history contributes to a larger narrative of American history. And that contribution all, all helps to create what that narrative is ultimately going to look like, right? That American history doesn't just shape Oklahoma history, that Oklahoma history helps to shape American history, right? That's what you've got to understand. When we talk about why you should care about it, it's also not just about the fact that you'll probably or possibly teach it, which is entirely possible, um, or that you'll possibly be tested on it or whatever. It's also the fact that this is a long and complicated history that directly impacts you. Um, if you want to understand why the state legislature, for example, is as messed up as it is, if you want to understand why our state constitution is as complicated and ridiculous as it is, you're going to need to learn the history of Oklahoma. There is a reason behind all of it. Um, so, yeah, there is a purpose that's greater than you fulfilling an obligation to this class. Okay. So, that said, I want to talk about the readings to this class. So, there are 3 books required for this class, right? When we talk about the readings to this class, there are uh, there are 2 books that you will read specifically so that you can write book reviews. And then there is 1 book that we will use for the purpose of using as almost like it's not quite a textbook, but it's sort of a book. It's a book of essays that we'll use as something that will help us better understand the material, the lecture material. So, when we talk about that wannabe textbook, we'll call it that, by Reese and Laughlin. That's called Main Street, Oklahoma: Stories of 20th Century America. There are 5 essays in there that we'll be reading, and um, essentially, when you think about those readings, in particular, you will have to write responses to those. So for each of the 5 essays that you'll be reading there. Now, all of the essays in that book are really important and contribute something significant to our understanding of Oklahoma, and I encourage you to read all of them. But there are 5 that we will be reading for the class. I will assign specific questions for you to answer. Uh, and for you to respond to. So I call them Main Street responses. That's designed to hold you accountable to the reading. So, that's the main thing. But you're also going to have to write, of course, book reviews, and those are for the other 2 books. One is by Zeller, African Creeks, Esvelte, and the Creek Nation, and the other is Bissett's Agrarian Socialism in America. The writing book reviews, I will give you specific guidelines on what the book reviews are going to look like. There will be word limits and specific expectations on what the book reviews um, will be. And um, there's also going to be expectations on um, engagement, right? So beyond reading and holding you accountable to the Main Street readings and beyond the book reviews, which is typically what we would do in class, there's also the engagement. By the engagement, what I mean is participating in weekly discussion threads. And I literally mean weekly because um, you are expected to listen to every single lecture on a weekly basis, and each discussion thread is available only for those specific weeks that are dated. So you'll notice that there are certain weeks that are assigned, like weeks of there are weeks assigned to certain lectures, and that lecture will be assigned to a specific thread. They're all coordinated together, but you are expected to engage in those discussion threads. So when we talk about engaging with the lectures and tying in with that, what I expect from that is one, you should listen carefully to these lectures. Listen carefully to what is being said and pay attention to it. Now, one of the things that you should be mindful of is that these lectures, and some of you who have had Dr. Bruce, you'll be aware of this already, but let me just mention these lectures are recorded like this one via Google Slides and posted through Studio. So I can keep track of whether or not you have actually um, followed these lectures if you've been paying attention to them. So I do know when you've paused, when you've stopped and picked up elsewhere. So I do know if you've been engaged or not. But I don't want you to just play and walk away. I want you to be able to pay attention and don't just learn about what's being talked about in the lecture. Start making connections. I know that we've all been, by we, I mean your other professors and I, Dr. Gates and Dr. Bruce, especially, we've all been emphasizing the idea of making connections between the other American history classes you've been taking, uh, uh, and being able to engage outside of your semesters, being able to make connections between your Gilded Age class and your Jackson class and, your 20th century class and all of that stuff. Start making connections in the narrative and start to connect themes. Look at the larger themes and ask yourself, how does what is happening here in Oklahoma in the 1910s, what's going on here that's reflective of what's going on in the United States in the 1910s? Or what is it that's happening in Oklahoma, you know, reflective of what's happening in the American West? Or that sort of thing. So in other words, if you have, and this is important, if you still have your American history textbook, use it. Use that to your advantage. If you don't have an American history textbook, and this is going to be very important for those of you who are U.S. history, or not U.S. history, but history education majors, first of all, you should have a U.S. history textbook anyway. I don't know why you don't, but if you don't, get one. You can get one super cheap off of Amazon. Get one. Get one that has the full narrative of U.S. history, both halves of U.S. history, because you're going to need it anyway to prepare your lectures when you teach high school or middle school, whenever, whatever you teach. Um, use it. Use it to help you better understand what's going on the national level. That leads me to this point. Take notes. Take notes of what's going on. Um, and make sure that you are thinking of yourself in a classroom. You may not be in a literal classroom. You're probably, no, you're not in Science 203, but wherever you're listening, that's going to be your classroom. And that means that you need to be focused and paying attention and taking notes. You walking around your kitchen and just listening to, the lecture doesn't mean that you're actually engaged in the lecture. And that leads me to back to the point about the discussion threads. Participate meaningfully. If you are literally just saying things like, well, I agree with what Joe said, that's not really meaningful. That doesn't add anything to anyone's understanding of what's going on. Or if you're making these broad, generalized answers of, well, I really think that Oklahoma was, um, you know, uh, different because it was originally Indian territory. Okay, well, that doesn't add to our understanding of anything either. Um, Make sure that you support your answers with what you learned in the lecture or what you understand. Now, in these discussion threads, I'm going to be monitoring the discussions, but I'm also going to start the discussions. So it's not like you're on your own, starting them and stopping them. I'm going to start them and I'm going to monitor them. You're not on your own, but participate meaningfully, like this is the classroom, because that's how I'm going to treat it. I don't have a choice, so neither do you. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about how to engage with the readings. This photograph, by the way, is was taken during the Tulsa Race Massacre. It's one of the photographs that was actually used um, to make a postcard. We'll talk about that later. So, this is what I always tell my students. So, those of you who have had me before, I know you guys get annoyed when I say this, but read thoughtfully and carefully. In other words, don't skim everything and think that that's enough. Read thoughtfully and carefully. Make sure that you are asking yourself how the essays that you're reading in Main Street, Oklahoma, or how the books that you were reading about, about agrarian socialism or about, African Americans or Black slaves living among the Creeks. How does that help your understanding? Um, how does that help you better learn or help you better understand Oklahoma history? Um, Also ask yourself, what is the author arguing? Every person who is writing, whether they're writing an essay or whether they're writing a book, they all have an argument. They all have a thesis statement. So ask yourself, okay, what are they arguing? What is their main point? Um, you need to know that. How has this enhanced what we've already learned? In other words, what else have you learned thanks to what you've read? What is it that has added to your understanding? This is going to be especially important as you read for your book reviews, but read critically. In other words, don't just read for the sake of reading, but read critically. What kind of sources did this author use? What kind of primary sources did they use? What kind of archives did they go into? Did they only use newspapers or were they able to use interviews? Were they able to take advantage of letters or somebody's diary? What kind of secondary sources did they use? What are the questions that you still have about this particular topic? What do you wish they had addressed? That's what I mean by read critically. What do you wish what do you wish you knew after reading what you've read? What is it that they didn't address? So this is what I mean by engaging with the readings. Okay. Now, when we get into the writing portion, um, this is where a lot of you struggle. And even those of you who've never taken me before, I'm gonna just say this is where we can fall apart. So I want to go slowly here. First of all, follow the directions. I I don't know why we fall apart here, but please follow the directions. I take the time to write them out, so please take the time to read them and follow them closely. So if I tell you that there's a word limit, then follow the word limit. If I tell you that there are margins to be followed, if I tell you that there is a font that you've got to follow and a font size, follow those rules. Follow the directions. The other thing is to write thoughtfully and carefully. If you've got to read thoughtfully and carefully, then you need to write thoughtfully and carefully. And the reason why is because people who wait until the last minute are careless. And if you are careless, then it means that you are going to make careless mistakes. You're going to say things that you don't mean. You're going to make really careless mistakes where it will make you look like you're lazy. And the problem with that is it's a poor reflection on you. It's a poor reflection on your work ethic. And that is not the kind of image you want to send. It's not the kind of message you want to send, right? So you want to be able to demonstrate that you not only understand the material, but you can communicate that you understand the material. The other thing that you want to be able to demonstrate is that you understand words and why they matter. So you choose your words carefully. Don't just go into a thesaurus and pick out a word because it sounds good. Know that you know what the word means, that you understand the word fits the sentence that you're using, all of that stuff. Here's the thing, this is where reading becomes so important. For those of you who don't read, who don't like reading, you don't like writing, if you don't like reading or writing, then history and history education is not the major for you. And in fact, I encourage you to change your major. I'm going to say that loud and proud all day, every day. If you don't like reading and you don't like writing, then this is not the major for you, because this is all we do. This is literally all we do. We read, we write, and that's it. Um, and I'm happy for you that you want to be a coach, but you can be a coach in health and physical education, and that could be your major. You can be an HPE major, and you can do something in kinesiology, or you can major in Parks and Rec and not bother yourself with history education. Why are you putting yourself through this if reading and writing is not for you? That's the kicker. So you want to be able to demonstrate that you have a mastery, or that you are on your way to a mastery of the language, that you not only read thoughtfully and carefully, but you write thoughtfully and carefully as well. Um, the other thing that you want to demonstrate in your reader responses and your book reviews is that you write as if you're a historian, because you are one. This is a 4,000 level class. This is not a beginner's class. This is a 4,000 level class. This is for senior level historians, right? So you need to demonstrate that you understand the material, you understand the readings, and that you take this seriously. One of the things that you want to be able to um, remember is that people are actually reading your work, right? Professionals are reading your work. Professionals are not only reading your work, but they are talking about your work. And your work is making an impression on other people. You have to think of yourself as a professional. You're not just a student, you are a professional at this level. And so, because of that, you want to make a good impression, because we're the ones who are going to write recommendation letters for you. We're the ones who are going to be references for you. So you want to be able to make an impression that we would be proud to be your references, right? We would be proud to write those recommendation letters for you. Um, and that's really important as well. So, with all of that in mind, I want to be able to say that knowing what's ahead, and I'm going to put all my contact information here, um, knowing what's ahead and knowing the kind of work that's required, and uh, the schedule that's ahead as well, you really kind of have to ask yourself if this is what it what you want to be doing and what you want to be engaged with in the spring semester. I think it's absolutely doable as long as you have the discipline to do it. Um, and it's a course worth learning. The history of Oklahoma is actually incredibly fascinating when you think about what's done uh, and what happens with race relations, what happens with gender, what happens with the economy, the things that happen and take place with labor and with World War II, the fact that we end up with, a naval base and we're a landlocked state. I mean, it makes no kind of sense, and yet we had it during the war. Um, we have a fascinating state history. And if you're willing to do the work, I think you will learn an incredible amount of information. But again, it's entirely up to you. Um, and of course, as always, if you ever have questions, if you ever feel overwhelmed, or you feel like you've got, you're confused or you would like to talk it through, this is how you get in touch with me. And I would be happy to talk you through it without any problem. Just let me know.